And I had made all these connections over the years, on both coasts. So I decided, why am I not doing this? If people are asking me and I'm spending so much time, this is something I should be doing. And so as a result, I wanted to do it the right way. So I set out to get mentored by people. I would meet with a casting director. I would meet with an agent, a former manager, and I'd sit and I'd ask them to tell me about the industry and what do you recommend I do and how do I get into it. And then just took a chance and started sending out my resume and pitching myself, basically.
From the cubicle to the lab, the studio to the war room, climbing the corporate ladder, or joining a scrappy startup, experience a day in the life of the jobs you want. This is the Experience a Diddle podcast.
We interview professionals, entrepreneurs, and recent grads to inspire you to gain experience beyond the classroom and launch a career of your own.
We're your hosts, Krista Bowe
and Matt Poe. Welcome to the Experience episode in the Shoot for the Star series with Bicoastal talent manager Sherry Kayne. We experience a day in the life in her role hour by hour in the A Diddle episode that's out now. Now let's learn how she made this complete 180 in her career from the courtroom to the red carpet.
Sherry went to Boston University and studied communications with a particular interest in political communications. Her initial career goal was to become a lobbyist, so the next step to achieve that was going to law school. So let's talk a little bit about what that process was like for her back then. Keep in mind, it was a crazy time for her. She was finishing up her bachelor's degree, she was preparing and taking the LSATs to get into law school, and she was getting married.
So you passed the bar exam.
I did. I passed first try.
First try.
Okay, but there are times you can take the test
yes,
over.
I know people who have taken it more than once. I know people who have taken it more than twice. So.
You have to wait like 6 months, right?
You have to wait, I think, a period of time for sure.
Yeah, so that could be a hindrance. She attended American University, Washington College of Law in Washington, D.C. She learned pretty quickly that D.C. was not for her. Law school, by the way, was not like undergrad.
They do things very differently. You get called upon. They use the Socratic method. When a teacher asks a question, they're not waiting for hands to be raised. They're going to call on whoever they want to call. And if you haven't done the reading, then you're not prepared, and you're gonna have to look bad basically in front of your colleagues.
I'm thinking of Legally Blonde,
and I was just going to say it's not that much different from Legally Blonde.
They did a good job depicting
that's
law school.
That's how it is. They call on you. You need to know the answers, and you better have read the night before. So
wow, were there times that you were picked on and you didn't know the answer?
I'm sure there were. As much as you study, there's always going to be questions that you're not sure of. So, right. And the law is evolving. So, some of the questions are opinions, and you might not have an opinion that really coincides with other people. So
that's
it's just a different process.
If you answered a question in the opinion that the professor didn't have, would it be considered a wrong answer? Or
no,
what?
I don't think so. I think that as a lawyer, you're really taught to look at all sides because you're not doing yourself any favors by looking at only one side of the problem. You need to look at all the possible answers in advance in order to see what's coming at you and
that makes sense.
Yeah, and be able to handle the situation properly.
Totally.
So you moved right after school from D.C. back to New Jersey, right?
I did.
There was no buffer in between that? Or?
No, I moved back from D.C. to New Jersey. I had my first job out of law school was working for as a clerk in New Jersey for a superior court judge in criminal law.
Gotcha.
And from there, my next years spent as an attorney. I was a prosecutor.
Did you enjoy that?
I loved it.
Okay.
And it's really interesting. You basically have to learn different things about getting up in front of, the jury and making your case. And it's not exactly like you see it on TV. Right. There's a lot of breaks in between where things have to be discussed. But it was a great experience. As a prosecutor, I got to help victims and their families feel like they've gotten some sense of
Like closure.
retribution, closure, something like that.
Justice.
Exactly,
Yeah.
justice.
Great.
So, I particularly remember a victim who was dealing with sexual assault case against a cousin, and she was a child, and it was very, very stressful, and the client actually felt much better afterwards. And after the defendant got convicted, he actually sent me a letter from prison, and he literally was apologizing for everything he had done before. So there was definitely a sense of feeling like you've helped people.
Right. Absolutely.
So.
I can imagine. That's great. Have you ever had your Marsha Clark moment? Like, have you ever been treated badly by the media, or like had like a case where it was kind of pretty big in the news, local news at all?
Well, I mean, this was a case where the case that I just described was a case where people didn't think that the defendant did it necessarily because the blood work came back differently.
Oh.
And I was able to show, because of an infection that was there, that it actually was, possible that he was the perpetrator, and that she had no other one who might have had opportunity to commit this crime. So that I got some flack from the defense attorneys originally, because the tests are always right. The tests aren't always right.
Wow.
There are things that can fluctuate and change them. So that was one thing. The other thing I would say, that as a woman in the industry, as a prosecutor, I totally had sympathy with Marsha Clark, because I think women are treated differently still. In some ways, I found that I would catch more bees with honey than I would if I tried to be the aggressive, strong woman in the courtroom.
Right.
The nicer I was, the more the jury liked me. If I was adamant about going after the defendant or going after somebody, they kind of thought I was not such a nice lady.
She was New Jersey's Middlesex County Marsha Clark for 5 years, when motherhood was literally calling her name.
What made you leave?
Children made me leave. Basically, I had my older daughter had turned 2.5. I just had another daughter. And my older daughter told me she wanted me to stay home, and I was able to do that. And while being a prosecutor was very rewarding, it didn't bring in the big bucks, because you're working for the government. So you have to always weigh those options. Do you, want to make less money doing something you love, or whether you want to make more money and maybe not love it as much? There's always those factors to consider. So I decided to stay home with my daughter because I could. And I did that for many years. Stayed home with my daughters, and they started acting as well. So because they started acting, I kind of needed to be there, because when you have an acting child, you get an audition the night before and you have to be ready to go. So,
okay.
You get the notification, and they're like, show up here at this time and be prepared and memorized. And so, that helped them by my being there. They couldn't do it if I wasn't there.
Definitely. So was it a tough decision? I mean, so you were 6 years out of law school. That's still relatively young in a career. Was it a tough decision to leave that behind? Or,
At the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. I think that you feel it. You know whether you should move on in the position you're in, or whether you should move to another job or start your family. And there's no right answers. I mean, no wrong answers, rather. It's just time will tell you if it's time to make a change, I think.
Gotcha. In your head, did you believe that you would go back into law after a certain amount of time, or were you just like, all right, I know I'm going to be full-time mom, and then I'm going to go do something else?
Well, I dabbled a little in law. While my girls were growing up, I worked as a public defender for my township.
Okay.
And it wasn't all that rewarding at that time for me. So I decided I just needed to concentrate on them. And then who knew what would come, later on. I thought I could always go back to law if I wanted to. But the reality is that I actually found my calling after that.
Definitely.
That's great.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. I read that you have to renew your law license every 2 years.
Ye-
Were you on top of that? Or?
I was definitely renewing for many years, and then at some point I just let it. I became a retired attorney.
What do you have to do to renew it? You just take a test, or?
You would have to take a certain amount of continuing legal education classes.
Gotcha.
She was a full-time mom for around 10 years. She wanted to be there for her daughters in every way possible, but especially since they were starting to express interest in the entertainment industry.
How old were your daughters when they started getting into the industry?
My older daughter was 11, and she was in a local community theater show. And somebody spotted her on stage and came up to me and said, "Your daughter needs to be doing this. I'm a talent manager. My husband's a talent manager." And they were actually from LA visiting in New Jersey and went to see this show that my daughter was in. And as a result, my daughter, the wheel started spinning. It wasn't me. I wasn't looking for it. And she said, "I want to do this. Send my picture out, please, to people, or send them my picture." And I said, "Well, they're in LA. We're in New York. I'm not going to do that." She said, "So send it in New York." So I sent it in New York, and she met with an agency, and they signed her on the spot, and then it began. So
That's great.
Right. And then my second daughter got into it because she was actually dragged to an audition because I couldn't find a sitter. And when she was dragged to the audition, she ended up with a callback. And then my older daughter's agent said, "We want to see her too." The very next thing that my younger daughter auditioned for was the Despicable Me films.
Wow.
And she booked the role of Edith, which is, that's carried her. She started at age 11, and now she's 21.
Wow.
Wait,
that's
Edith
great.
is which one?
The one in the pink hat, the tomboy.
Oh, that's so cute. Can you?
That's the best daughter. That's the best one in the movie.
I think she's pretty special myself.
So, can you talk a little more about that audition process for big films like that? What's that like?
Well, this was a little different for her because that's a voiceover. So
Right.
that audition process was basically she would go to a studio like this. This one happened to be within her agent's offices. They actually have a sound booth.
Nice.
So she would go in there and they would give her lines. Actually, at that time, they didn't have the real script to show us. It was all top secret. So they had her read lines from the movie Definitely Maybe.
Okay.
And she read the lines, and then 2 weeks later, they called us out to LA, and she booked it.
Wow,
So
that's so
it was
great.
pretty interesting.
So when they
process.
told you that you had to go out to LA, was it like, you got the movie, we need to sign it in person? Or was it like, did you have butterflies? Did you not know what was going to happen?
We didn't know what was happening. First of all, I should tell you that when we got the audition for my daughter, we turned it down first. And the reason why we turned it down is because I never wanted my daughters to have to sacrifice anything in the industry. It was her 6th grade camping trip. She wanted to go. We wanted her to go and have that experience. So we said, "Sorry, she can't make this audition." We didn't know what it was.
Right.
Several days later, they called her and they hadn't found the right voice in New York or LA. She went into New York. She laid down the lines. And then 2 weeks later, that's when we were being called out to LA. And I am still convinced to this day that if she had gone in when they wanted her to, it might not have been hers.
Oh my gosh.
So I think I'm also now, as a talent manager, I'm not a kind of manager that gets stressed out if somebody can't make an audition, because I always take my personal experiences. I'm really an advocate for the actor because as the parent of an actor, I know how difficult and unprofessional the business can be sometimes. And I try to bring some, semblance of professionalism to it.
What are some other things that you taught your daughters about the industry that you just to shape them as women, as professionals, as?
I think probably the most important thing to know as an actor going into the industry is that you're going to be rejected way more times than it's not even comparable. And people are going to laugh at you and tell you no, or they're just not going to think that you're right for the role. I mean, Meryl Streep was told no you'll never make it as a star. Well, there you go. And you just have to take it with a grain of salt and learn from every experience and look at the audition as the job in some ways, because when you get to the point of auditioning in the room, casting directors have already gone through thousands of resumes and headshots, and they've selected, a handful of people to come in the room. Mm-hmm. So, compared to what they see, you've already done a great job in what you're doing. Standing out and getting in the room. And then when you're in the room, have fun with it, right. and make good choices, make different choices. They don't want to hear the same thing. They don't want to hear what you think they expect to hear. They want to hear something a little different. So right. When we speak, we'll have all these nuances and quirks and things like that. Those go into an audition. Somebody might be twirling her hair in disgust as they're talking to their mom. It's not being fidgety if you're doing that kind of thing and twirling your hair, if that's what you would normally do. Use those everyday experiences and add them into your audition.
So it was full speed ahead for her daughters and herself in the entertainment biz. Sherry was really getting into it, and because of her law and communications background, she was picking it up pretty fast. So Sherry's relationships she made and career experience she had in the industry at this point onward in her career all came about because she wanted to learn more about the industry. She was a theater wrangler at her older daughter's theater group in New Jersey, and
I ended up being a chairperson for my younger daughter. She was in a show choir in California. And that show choir she was in was actually what Glee was modeled. The TV show Glee was modeled after. So I got to see all that kind of behind the scenes stuff, and I think that all helped me too in dealing with kids and dealing with parents and dealing with directors. So
when you got that experience, did you take on those roles as a mom, like helping out her daughters?
Pretty much.
But not as like a professional move, I guess.
No, it really wasn't.
It was just to help out.
Kind of happened to help out, but I definitely gained a lot from doing it.
Totally.
As a wrangler for show choir, as a parent chairperson for show choir, I had to be fingerprinted. They had to check me out, all that kind of stuff.
Cool.
And what exactly is a wrangler?
A wrangler is somebody basically who wrangles up the kids and says it's time to go on stage, or keeps them quiet, or helps them put on their last touches for their, makeup, and finds the costume pieces that they're missing, and
Gotcha.
It's just basically to keep everything in a state of normalcy backstage while the show is going on.
You're like the oil in the machine.
Yeah, trying to make it all work. Exactly.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
So then when did you move to LA?
I moved to LA, my daughter's, I think it was 2013, my daughter's junior year of high school. She had just done the work for Despicable Me 2.
Okay.
My older daughter was in college, so I wasn't leaving her behind. She left me behind. And I went out there to LA we were told by my daughter's manager that it would be a good idea, good timing between publicity and meeting new casting directors out in LA as opposed to New York might be a good thing. So we went out there.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
And then when was it that you were like officially their manager?
I was their manager from pretty much the time they started until I would say a year before we moved out to LA. And that's when I thought it would be time to add somebody to our team.
What made you want to do that?
The second film was coming out. It was, there had been so much publicity generated from the first. She was working not only on the film, but the rides for Universal in Hollywood and in Orlando. Her character was more well-known. And the Minions were basically taking over as like the Mickey Mouse of Universal.
Right.
So I thought maybe it would pay to have some, more people on the team. Her agent was in New York, and we loved her agent, but we also wanted somebody in LA, and her manager was LA focused. So.
Sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And then what's like the typical amount of people on an actor or actress's team, like generally?
It depends on where you are in your career. Some people might just have one agent. Some people might just have one manager. Some people might have an agent or a manager. And if you're really, gotten into the business deeply, then you might have an agent, a manager, a publicist. There's always coaches that people use as well. So it's not like there's a set number.
Right.
And again, everyone's journey is different.
There obviously was a tipping point between just you being the manager for your daughter and then taking on a whole client list.
Yes.
I want to talk about that transition and what was going through your mind, how that all happened.
So my younger daughter was graduating from high school and going off to college.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I said, my job is pretty much done here. They don't want to see me or hear from me. No, I'm only kidding. But I thought I need to do something for me now.
Mm-hmm.
People over the years have always called me up and asked me about how to get your kids in the entertainment business. They would ask me various questions. I'd spend hours on the phone telling them or, in person meeting with them to talk to them because they wanted help getting into the industry. And I had made all these connections over the years, on both coasts. So I decided, why am I not doing this? If people are asking me and I'm spending so much time, this is something I should be doing. And so as a result, I wanted to do it the right way. So I set out to get mentored by people. I would meet with a casting director. I would meet with an agent, a former manager, and I'd sit and I'd ask them to tell me about the industry and what do you recommend I do and how do I get into it. And then just took a chance and started sending out my resume and pitching myself, basically, and explaining what my experiences were with my daughters and my communications background and my law background and how all of these could go together and be really good to make sure I was good at my job. I would be an manager or an agent. I found a company that seemed to be a great fit. They allowed me to create my own roster.
Nice.
As opposed to have them service their clients on the roster because it's hard to be passionate about somebody that you didn't really meet and start with. You can be, but it's better to kind of meet people on your own and start your own roster and really create it from the ground up. I felt like that's what I wanted to do. Some of my clients have a vast amount of experience, and some of my clients are developmental. But everybody on my roster is somebody I'm passionate about.
That's great.
And so I decided that this was a good fit. They allowed me to create my own roster, to go back and forth from New York to LA, have clients in both places. I have one daughter who works in New York at CNN and another daughter who works in LA and goes to school in LA. So this way I could divide my time between both places. So,
that's great.
Yeah.
So was there an interview process for the green room?
There was an interview process.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, yes. They called me in and they had all of the managers sitting around a conference table and they just asked me questions about myself and why I thought I would be good for the job. And basically, I had to pitch myself. Mm-hmm. And that's so much of what I do in my job is pitching my clients for roles or opportunities. So I think that really helped sell me, that it was Definitely. Just that they could see that I was passionate about the work. And they could see that I would be good with parents and kids because I had that background experience of being on the other side of the table. So between those things and the fact that I had a communications background and a law background, they were willing to take a chance. And I got more than one offer. So it was really, really nice to, at my age, to be able to really get into a job and start running.
Sherry's been at the Green Room since 2015 and works with her clients to get gigs in the entertainment industry. We go more into depth in what she specifically does for her clients in the Diddle episode of the series, but let's learn about other facets of the industry.
First, let's talk about the big and small fish in the talent representation pond, if you will. The Green Room is a boutique talent management company, and there are others that exist on the management and on the agency side of things across the country in terms of their boutique status. However, there are larger agencies in particular that all exist to serve elite and A-list Hollywood and entertainment stars. So some of the popular ones that come to mind are WMA, ICM Partners, CAA, and so on. Sherry has advice for performers and actors just starting out who are looking for representation.
I wouldn't advise somebody starting in the business or, even, has gotten their feet wet or has done a few things here and there. That's not necessarily the best place for you. And quite frankly, they wouldn't want you.
Right.
So a boutique agency or smaller agency is really much more hands-on. So that would be the best place for a newcomer to the industry to look for representation.
This relates to the same debate that we're having about working for a big company versus a small company. The smaller the company, the more hands-on you'll most likely be, and the same goes for talent representation. Now, let's learn about how an actor can become a part of the union, the difference between a union and a non-union gig, and why the distinction between the two is very important. Sherry, mind taking this one?
There's a few ways of getting in the union. One way is that you do a certain amount of extra roles, and then you can join the union. I don't necessarily advise extra work. I feel like sometimes it's more like being a prop, but some people do it one time to get the experience on set, to see what it feels like, but you don't really get treated the same way an actor who has a role on a show gets treated.
Gotcha.
But the other way of getting into the union is to book a number of union jobs. And even if you're not a union member, you will be submitted and pitched for jobs that are union. And they're allowed to use a non-union member. There's an exception called Taft-Hartley, and they can bring in that non-union member to do the job. And for example, this week I had two non-union, they were at this point, they were SAG eligible. They had already completed one SAG job, Screen Actors Guild job. That makes you SAG eligible. But if you're on your third one, that's when you really have to join the union. So we got these alarms from SAG when they tried to put through the offer, oh, it's time to join SAG. So they had to pay up their membership and join SAG. And now they won't be able to audition for non-union projects,
Gotcha.
which is... it's kind of like a champagne problem. It's, you're celebrating because you want to be part of the union because that's where most of the legitimate great projects are working in the union. And then you get like these great little perks, you get screeners before the Screen Actors Guild Awards. And the screeners for all the movies that are coming out, that year are nominated, or you get to go to screening events with the stars talking about their experiences
Oh, cool.
and things like that. I mean, you also have to pay a fee, which isn't great, but you're getting benefits. You can get insurance, things like that from being a SAG
And there's
member.
one unit or union?
It's the Screen Actors Guild.
Gotcha.
And there's actually After too, which really deals with TV more and radio. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Interesting. Do you have clients on your roster that are part of the union?
Almost
All of them.
Almost all of my clients are part of the union. They didn't start out there necessarily. My younger clients who are just starting in the business, they are not.
Nice.
So
Cool.
But they literally, it's cause for celebration when you have to join the union.
Nice.
And there's no age requirement to join the union. It's just your experience and like how you're getting yourself out there. That's what determines it.
It is really, there's no age requirement. But being on a project that is a union project is definitely, to your advantage. They're making sure all the laws are being obeyed, that kids are getting tutored properly, that they're, that they are not doing anything, putting them through like stunts that they shouldn't be putting them through, things like that.
Okay.
So, working a union project is definitely preferable.
Gotcha. So the big studios and stuff like that, all the A-list actors, they're all part of the union.
Yeah, they all the studios use union. Some projects are also non-union for some of the studios. Like Nickelodeon has non-union jobs here and there, that kind of thing.
Nice. Okay, great.
Interesting.
Cool. I didn't know that.
So and maybe I'm just having a tough time getting my head around it. So what separates a non-union job from a union job, especially at a big network like Nickelodeon? I would imagine that they should all be union. Why would they have a non-union job?
It's a cheaper way out, I guess.
Okay, so
I
there's
think
fees
that
along.
every time you have to follow certain rules and you have to pay certain fees. And, I'm not saying Nickelodeon's great. They do what they need to do, even for their non-union projects. So don't take it as meaning that they're doing the right things. But it's just probably a less expensive route to go.
Gotcha. Okay.
And they can employ people who aren't members of the union, that kind of thing.
That wraps up our experience episode in the Shoot for the Stars series with Bi-Coastal Talent Manager Sherry Kayne.
Do you need experience? Are you looking for an internship? Well, you can join the team and interview anyone in any industry by becoming an Experience-a-Diddle student interviewer. Regardless of your major or amount of experience, this is the perfect stepping stone into any internship or career. Apply to the Adiddle Army at experienceadiddle.com/students. That's experienceaditl.com/students. Thanks for listening. To find the show notes with all relevant links and photos for this series, head over to experienceadiddle.com. That's experienceaditl.com.
If you learned something in this episode, please take some time to help our mission by leaving a positive rating and review of the show. Each week, we bring you a new interview series with guests from different jobs and industries. In every series, we live a specific day in the life, hour by hour, experience the career journey, and have a discussion about what we learned. So, don't forget to subscribe.